Fake news is obviously bad, but unfortunately it's basically everywhere. This issue is perhaps most famous at the national level, with various outlets acting effectively as soft propaganda for the powers that control Washington, D.C. However, it's far from being just a national issue. Fake news is everywhere. Increasingly, local news is being pervaded by astroturfed bad faith efforts to propagandize audiences under the veneer of local reputability. And just how big is this issue? Well, tell me if this sounds familiar.
This is one of those stories that would have been a rather dull satire a decade ago, but these days is just standard operating procedure. From a group called Dallas Justice Now, an open letter to wealthy white liberals. Open up spaces for Black and Latinx communities by refusing to send your kids to Ivy League and US News and World Report top 50 schools, and encourage friends, neighbors, and family members to do the same.
If you happen to hear that story, it was all fake. I'm Ethan McCarthy with MyPoint TV. After everything that happened with Dallas Justice Now this summer, I reached out to independent, Dallas-based journalist Steven Monacelli, the guy who was largely responsible for bringing Dallas Justice Now to a national audience. I asked him about what lessons he hopes we take away from it, as well as how he heard about the story in the first place.
It came on my radar through social media. This was like a few days after the letters had already been sent out at this point. And so, I mean, the letter itself was suspicious because I had never seen any social justice, Black Lives Matter affiliated group do something like that in either case.
The letter that Steven's referring to is this one that was placed in the mailboxes of Highland Park residents. It urges parents not to send their kids to America's top universities, as having white children attend these schools takes away spaces from students of color. Now, if the absurdity of the letter itself wasn't enough to pique your suspicions, there was a series of other inconsistencies surrounding the organization. It had a large number of likely bot followers, it has no clear public figurehead, its content was either plagiarized or unbelievably cliched, and perhaps most damning was how its source code was linked to a Republican PR firm in Utah. All of this and more led Steven to believe that Dallas Justice Now had ulterior motives besides simply social justice.
It's not a stretch to assume that deception was the intention. The deception was intended to fool a Fox News audience, basically, someone along those lines, that sort of demographic, into believing that this was something that a Black Lives Matter organization would actually do. They also wanted to fool mainstream news as well, I believe, into covering it as real. But at the very least, I believe it was set up to, smear an opponent as ridiculous. In that goal, they basically achieved it because it made it all the way to Tucker Carlson's show, put into the minds of millions of Americans, at the very least. A bunch of other articles also were put out that reported on it credulously. And I think we all know that the statistics of people who ever see any of the follow-up stories is very low. I think we can assume that a lot of people walked away from those early news stories with some further confirmation in their mind that, Black Lives Matter, anyone who's sort of pushing a similar agenda is ridiculous. I think it achieved that goal. We have this massive problem that is information warfare. It's psy-ops shit. There are attempts to go after these things, and there are institutions that are trying to, fight disinformation. But at the local level, where this is actually being operationalized, not very great. Like, I'm a freelance reporter. I'm just a guy. And for me to be the guy that was able to break this open, it shouldn't be like that. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It should not be like that. And there may not be one of me in every major metropolitan area in the South where this shit is happening. And it's very likely that some other similar things are occurring and we just don't know about it. So that is what I would say my 2-point nutshell of what this story means to me and what I would hope people would take away from it.
We are constantly being bombarded by fake news, and this story proves just how quickly and far it can spread. So how do we deal with it? Is fake news even an issue that can be completely solved, or do we just have to try to mitigate its damages? And if so, how? We'd love to hear from you below.